At 2:27 p.m. on October 14, 1943, Captain James Howard watched a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress take a 20mm cannon shell directly into the No. 3 engine nacelle at 24,000 feet over Belgium. The engine exploded in a ball of orange fire. Pieces of cowling spiraled away like confetti. The bomber shuddered, rolled left, slowly at first, then faster. It entered a flat spin, 1 rotation, 2, 3. The escape hatches stayed closed. 10 men inside, trapped. The bomber spun toward the ground like a child's toy thrown from a window. Howard counted to 15 before he had to look away. 10 men had maybe 40 seconds left to live, and there was nothing he could do about it. Howard was flying a P-51B Mustang at 26,000 feet. The throttle was pushed forward against the stop. Full military power. The Packard Merlin engine roared. When 300 horsepower, the manifold pressure gauge read 61 inches of mercury. Red line. Maximum allowable boost according to every technical manual, every training document, every regulation written by engineers at Wright Field who had never watched a friend die in combat. His airspeed indicator showed 380 miles per hour. The Mustang was the most advanced fighter in the American inventory. Longer range than a P-47 Thunderbolt. Better high-altitude performance than a P-38 Lightning. Faster than almost anything in the sky. Almost. And that almost was killing bomber crews. 3,000 feet below him, 291 B-17s were streaming back from Schweinfurt, Germany. They had bombed the ball-bearing factories. Critical war production. Now they were fighting their way home through the largest Luftwaffe fighter response Howard had seen in 6 weeks of combat. Maybe 300 German fighters. Messerschmitt Bf-109s. Focke-Wulf 190s. The P-47 Thunderbolts that had escorted the bombers into Germany had turned back 90 minutes ago. Fuel exhausted. Range limit. Now, it was Howard's squadron of 14 P-51 Mustangs trying to protect almost 300 four-engine bombers against an entire Luftwaffe fighter wing. The math was not good. A second B-17 took hits from a Focke-Wulf 190, making a head-on attack. Howard saw the cannon strikes walk up the nose. The glass shattered. The bombardier and navigator were killed instantly. The bomber kept flying straight and level for 8 seconds. Then the nose dropped. The aircraft entered a shallow dive. 2 more men dead. Maybe the pilots were hit, maybe the controls were severed. Either way, the bomber was going down. Nobody bailed out, not yet. Howard knew what that meant. The crew was trying to regain control, trying to save the aircraft. They would try until the last possible moment. Then they would jump, assuming there was time, assuming the aircraft did not break apart first. Howard keyed his radio. Red flight, this is Red Leader. Bandits at 4 o'clock low, going in. He rolled the Mustang inverted and pulled back on the stick. The nose dropped, the altimeter unwound. 25,000 feet, 24,000, 23,000. His airspeed climbed 390 miles per hour. 400, 410. G-forces pressed him into the seat. His vision narrowed at the edges. The Mustang was fast in a dive. That was not the problem. The problem came when he leveled off. A Bf-109 broke away from attacking a B-17 and saw Howard coming. The German pilot did exactly what German pilots had been doing for 6 weeks. He pushed his nose down slightly and accelerated away. Not a dive. Just a shallow descent to build speed, then level flight. Running. The Bf-109G could hit 387 miles per hour at 22,000 feet. Fast enough to escape. Every single time. Howard leveled off at 22,000 feet and pushed the throttle forward. It was already against the stop. Already at maximum power. Already at 61 inches manifold pressure. Already giving everything the engine was rated to deliver. His airspeed held at 380 miles per hour. The Bf-109 ahead of him was pulling away, 800 yards, 900 yards, 1,000 yards. The German aircraft shrank in his gun sight, out of range. Howard watched the 109 make a wide turn and head back toward the bombers, set up for another attack run, another dead crew. Howard slammed his fist against the canopy rail. The impact sent a jolt of pain up his arm. He did not care. He was flying a $50,000 fighter and he was useless. The Mustang was supposed to be the solution. Long range, good altitude performance. On paper, it could catch anything the Luftwaffe had. But paper did not account for real fuel, real air, real physics. In combat, at altitude, the P-51 was 10 miles per hour too slow. And that 10 miles per hour was the difference between protecting bombers and watching them burn. Red flight, stay with the bombers. Do not chase. Repeat, do not chase. We cannot catch them. The radio crackled acknowledgments. His wingmen knew they had all tried. They had all watched German fighters run away while bombers died. It was not tactics. It was not courage. It was pure physics. The P-51 could not go fast enough. Another B-17 exploded. Howard saw it out of his peripheral vision. Just there 1 second, gone the next. A flash of orange fire, black smoke, debris tumbling through the air. The bomber had taken a hit in the bomb bay. Probably a hung bomb that got struck by cannon fire. The explosion tore the aircraft in half. The tail section separated and tumbled backward. The nose section pitched forward and fell like a stone. 11 men, maybe 1 or 2, got out before the explosion. The rest were dead before they knew what happened. Howard had seen it before. A bomber could go from flying straight and level to completely disintegrated in under 2 seconds. There was no time to react, no time to bail out, just instant death at 24,000 feet. By the time the bomber stream crossed into Allied airspace over Belgium, Howard had watched 12 B-17s go down. 12 aircraft, 132 men. Some bailed out, some got captured, some died. The final count would come later. Right now, all Howard knew was that he had flown a 4-hour combat mission and accomplished nothing. He had not fired his guns. He had not engaged a single German fighter successfully. He had just watched. A spectator at a massacre, flying the most advanced fighter America could build, and it was not good enough. Howard landed at Boxted Airfield in England at 4:53 p.m. He taxied to his revetment and shut down the engine. The propeller blades swung to a stop. The sound of the Merlin engine faded to silence. Howard sat in the cockpit and stared at his hands on the control stick. They were shaking. Not from cold, from adrenaline, from rage, from the knowledge that tomorrow he would have to do this again and the result would be exactly the same. More bombers lost, more crews dead, and he would be powerless to stop it. His crew chief, Staff Sergeant Robert Chilton, was standing on the wing when Howard finally popped the canopy. Chilton was 26 years old. Medium build, blonde hair cut short, hands stained black from engine grease. He had been maintaining P-51s since the squadron received them in August, 3 months ago. In those 3 months he had watched pilots come back from missions looking exactly like Howard looked right now. Exhausted, angry, defeated. "How bad?" Chilton asked. Howard climbed out of the cockpit. His legs were stiff from sitting for 4 hours. He stepped onto the wing and jumped down to the concrete hardstand. We lost 60 B-17s. I counted 12 go down myself. Probably more after I stopped counting. Chilton did not say anything. 60 bombers was 600 men. Maybe half would survive, maybe. The rest were dead or captured. That was the worst single-day loss since Schweinfurt back in August. "The 109s just run away from us," Howard said. His voice was flat, emotionless. I had one lined up perfect at 800 yards, full throttle. He pulled away like I was standing still. I cannot catch them. None of us can. Chilton looked at the Mustang. The paint on the cowling was stained with oil smoke. Normal after a long flight. He ran his hand along the leading edge of the wing. No bullet holes. Howard had not been in a dogfight, had not fired his guns, had just watched. "What is your manifold pressure at altitude?" Chilton asked. Howard looked at him. "Why? I am trying to understand the problem. What manifold pressure do you see at 25,000 feet full throttle? 61 inches. Red line, that is all the engine can take." Chilton nodded. That explained everything. The P-51 Mustang had the right airframe, the right engine, the right equipment, but it was being choked by regulations written by engineers who thought in terms of engine longevity and maintenance schedules, not life and death at 25,000 feet. He had suspected this for weeks. Now he was sure. "Can I see your engine logs?" Chilton asked. Howard pulled the maintenance logbook from the cockpit and handed it over. "What are you looking for?" "Just checking something." Chilton flipped through the pages. Oil pressure normal. Engine temperature normal. Manifold pressure 61 inches maximum. Fuel consumption 85 gallons per hour. Everything exactly according to specification, which meant everything was wrong. The engine was being run conservatively, safely, slowly. "Your carburetor is set at .067 air-to-fuel ratio," Chilton said. He looked up from the logbook. "That is lean mixture. You are running this engine like a mail plane, not a fighter." Howard had no idea what that meant. He was a pilot. He knew how to fly. He knew how to fight. He did not know how carburetors worked. "What is .067? It means for every pound of fuel, you are mixing it with 15 pounds of air. Lean mixture, burns clean, saves fuel, extends engine life, but it also limits power. At .067, the engine cannot take more than 61 inches boost. The supercharger cannot push harder because there is not enough fuel in the mix to support higher manifold pressure." "So, what should it be?" Howard asked. Chilton closed the logbook. .083, maybe .085. Rich mixture, more fuel per unit of air. That lets the engine run hotter and take higher boost. With rich mixture you could run 72 inches manifold pressure. Maybe 75. That is another 300 horsepower at altitude. Maybe 340 if the engine is healthy. Howard stared at him. 340 horsepower would translate to about 30 miles per hour at altitude. Maybe 35. The difference between 380 miles per hour and 415. The difference between watching German fighters escape and catching them. The difference between helpless and deadly. "Why is my engine not set up that way?" Howard asked. "Because the technical manual says lean mixture. The Army Air Force wants maximum engine life and minimum fuel consumption. They set the standard at .067, and every Packard Merlin in the inventory is adjusted to that spec. It is regulations. Can you change it?" Chilton looked at the Mustang, then at Howard. "Yes. But if I do, I am violating about 6 different technical orders. If the engine fails, I get court-martialed. If you crash, I get court-martialed. If anybody finds out I modified your carburetor without written authorization from right field, I spend the rest of the war in a military prison. So, no, I cannot officially change it." Howard understood what Chilton was really saying. "Can you unofficially change it?" Chilton did not smile. His expression stayed serious. "If someone were to adjust your carburetor tonight while you were at dinner, you would notice the engine running different tomorrow. Rougher idle, higher fuel consumption. Engine would run hotter. But it would also be a lot faster." "How much faster?" 35 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Maybe more. And what do I need to do? Go to the officers' club, have dinner, come back in 3 hours. Do not ask me any questions about your engine. Just fly it tomorrow and see what happens." Howard looked at Chilton for a long moment. "If this works, you are saving lives. If it does not work, you are throwing away your career, maybe worse." Chilton met his eyes. "Sir, I watched you come back from missions for 3 months looking like you look right now. I watched other pilots come back the same way, or not come back at all. If I can do something to change that, I do not care what happens to me." Howard nodded slowly. Then he extended his hand. Chilton shook it. 3 hours, no questions. "Yes, sir, no questions." Howard walked toward the officers' club. Chilton watched him go. Then he turned and looked at the P-51 Mustang sitting in the revetment, the most advanced fighter in the European theater. Beautiful lines, powerful engine, long range, fast, but not fast enough. Because some engineer at Wright Field decided to prioritize engine longevity over combat effectiveness. Because regulations said lean mixture. Because nobody had thought to ask whether the fighters were actually fast enough to do their job. Chilton grabbed his tool bag from the maintenance shack and walked back to the aircraft. The sun was setting. In 3 hours it would be fully dark. He opened the cowling access panel on the left side of the engine and stared at the Packard Merlin. 12 cylinders. Liquid-cooled. Supercharged. It made 103 horsepower at sea level according to the spec sheet. But that was at .067 mixture. At rich mixture, at full throttle, at altitude, this engine could make over 1,600 horsepower. Maybe 1,650 if he pushed it. That was the difference between watching friends die and actually protecting them. He reached into the engine bay and found the carburetor mounted on the supercharger intake. The fuel mixture adjustment screw was on top. He pulled a wrench from his tool bag and loosened the lock nut. Factory setting was .067. He turned the screw for full rotations clockwise. Richer mixture, more fuel, more power, more speed. He tightened the lock nut and closed the cowling. The modification took 9 minutes. Tomorrow morning, Howard would start this engine and it would burn 25% more fuel than specification. It would run rough at idle because the mixture was too rich for low-power settings. But at full throttle, at 26,000 feet, with the supercharger spooled up and the throttle against the stop, this engine would make the P-51 Mustang faster than any fighter over Germany. Chilton picked up his tool bag and walked back to the maintenance shack. He logged the work as routine inspection. No modifications noted. Then he went to his quarters and lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. If the engine failed tomorrow, Howard might die. If the modification caused any problem, Chilton would be court-martialed. If anyone discovered what he had done, his career was over. But if it worked, American bomber crews would have a fighter that could actually protect them. Crews like the ones who died today. 60 aircraft, 600 men. Most of them dead or captured because P-51 Mustangs were 10 miles per hour too slow. Chilton closed his eyes. His hands were shaking. Tomorrow, he would find out if he had just saved lives or destroyed everything. There was no middle ground. Either the math worked or it did not. Either physics cooperated or it did not. Either Howard came back alive or he did not. And Chilton would have to live with the results either way. He did not sleep that night. At 7:14 a.m. on October 15, 1943, Captain James Howard walked across the concrete hardstand at Boxted Airfield toward his P-51B Mustang. The sun was just breaking the horizon. The air was cold enough that his breath made clouds of vapor that hung in the stillness. The entire flight line smelled of aviation fuel and engine oil. Normal morning smells. But Howard's hands were shaking inside his flight gloves. Not from cold. From the knowledge that he was about to fly an aircraft with an illegally modified engine that might explode at 25,000 feet, with no one to blame but himself for agreeing to it. Chilton was waiting by the aircraft. He looked terrible, eyes bloodshot, face pale, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets like he was trying to stop them from shaking. He had not slept. Howard could tell. The man had spent the entire night wondering if the modification he made would work or if it would kill someone. When Howard got close enough, Chilton pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it over. It was a maintenance log entry, dated today, signed by Chilton. It read, "Routine engine inspection, no discrepancies noted." A complete lie. If anyone discovered the truth, that piece of paper would be Exhibit A at Chilton's court-martial. "The engine is going to run different," Chilton said. His voice was quiet, hoarse, rough idle. "You will hear it immediately. When you push the throttle up for takeoff, ignore it. Once you get airborne and climb to altitude, everything will smooth out. At full throttle, above 20,000 feet, you're going to see manifold pressure numbers you have never seen before. Do not panic. The engine can handle it. Just watch your cylinder head temps. If they go above 260 degrees Celsius, pull back the throttle slightly. That is the only limit. Temps, not manifold pressure." Howard took the paper and folded it into his flight suit pocket. "What numbers am I going to see?" Chilton met his eyes. 73 inches, maybe 75, maybe higher if the supercharger is really healthy. That is 12 to 14 inches above redline according to the tech manual. It is going to feel wrong. It is going to sound wrong. But it is not wrong. It is what this engine was designed to do before some engineer decided to strangle it for the sake of regulations. And if something breaks, then I destroyed a fighter and maybe killed you, and I spend the rest of my life knowing that." Chilton's voice cracked slightly. "But sir, I built NASCAR engines for 5 years. I know what engines can handle. This modification is not pushing anything beyond design limits. It is just using the full capability that was always there. The Packard Merlin can take this. I am sure of it." Howard looked at Chilton for a moment. The man was risking everything, his career, his freedom, possibly his life if the wrong people decided he was sabotaging aircraft. All because he believed he was right and the regulations were wrong. Howard nodded once. Then he climbed onto the wing and swung himself into the cockpit. The seat was cold, the instruments were cold. Everything smelled like leather and metal and oil. He strapped in, 5-point harness, parachute connected, oxygen mask hanging loose, radio lead plugged in. He ran through the pre-start checklist by memory. Fuel selector on main tanks, mixture control full rich, propeller control full forward, throttle cracked 1 inch, magnetos off, battery on. He was flying a test flight with an illegally modified engine, and the next 30 minutes would determine whether Chilton was a genius or whether they both ended up in prison. He hit the starter. The Packard Merlin coughed once, twice, then caught with a roar that was immediately wrong. The idle was rough, really rough. The engine was shaking the entire airframe. RPM was fluctuating wildly between 650 and 780. Normally, it sat rock steady at 700. The sound was different too. Deeper, more aggressive, angrier. Like the engine was being held back and wanted to be released. Howard looked down at Chilton standing on the hardstand. Chilton gave a thumbs up. His face was tense. Howard returned the gesture. Then he released the parking brake and taxied toward the runway. Behind him, the engine note sounded like nothing he had ever heard from a Mustang before. The tower cleared him for takeoff at 7:22 a.m. Howard rolled onto the runway, locked to the tailwheel, and took a breath. This was the moment. Either the engine would perform or it would fail. Either Chilton was right or people would die. He pushed the throttle forward. The engine responded instantly. The rough idle disappeared. The Mustang surged forward like it had been kicked. The acceleration was violent. Howard felt himself pressed back into the seat harder than ever before. The tail came up at 45 miles per hour. The main gear lifted off at 105 miles per hour. Normally, it was 115. He was airborne 10 miles per hour earlier than specification. That was the extra horsepower. That was what rich fuel mixture and high boost pressure did when you stopped being afraid of regulations and started using what the engine was actually capable of delivering. He climbed straight ahead to 5,000 feet and leveled off. The engine was running smooth now. No roughness, no vibration. Just pure aggressive power. He checked his instruments. Oil pressure 85 pounds per square inch. Normal. Coolant temperature 90 degrees Celsius. Normal. Manifold pressure 52 inches. Normal for this altitude and power setting. Everything looked good. He keyed his radio. Boxted Tower, this is Mustang 27. Climbing to flight level 250 for engine test. Will report results. The tower acknowledged. Howard pulled the stick back and started climbing. The Mustang went up like an express elevator. The rate of climb indicator showed 3,400 feet per minute. Normally, it was 2,800, another 600 feet per minute from the extra power. The aircraft was clawing its way into the sky faster than any Mustang should be able to climb. He watched the altimeter unwind. 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet, 20,000 feet. At 25,000 feet, he leveled off and pushed the throttle all the way forward. Full military power. Maximum continuous thrust. This was the moment Chilton's modification would either prove itself or destroy the engine. The manifold pressure gauge began to climb. Howard watched the needle move past the red line printed on the dial at 61 inches. He was in territory no P-51 pilot had ever been. The engine note changed. Deeper, more aggressive. Like something was being unleashed after months of being held back. 65 inches. 68 inches. 70 inches. The aircraft was shaking slightly, not violently. Just a steady vibration through the stick and rudder pedals that told him the engine was working harder than it had ever worked before. 12 cylinders. 2-stage supercharger. Fuel mixture set rich enough to support combustion at pressures that should not be possible according to every technical manual ever written. 72 inches. Howard's grip on the stick was so tight his knuckles were white inside his gloves. His breathing was shallow, fast. If something failed now, at 25,000 feet over England, he would have maybe 30 seconds to react before the engine seized or caught fire or threw a connecting rod through the cowling. 30 seconds to save the aircraft or bail out. The needle touched 73 inches, then crept past it. 74 inches of mercury, 14 inches above the red line. 14 inches above what every engineer at Wright Field would say was maximum safe boost. The needle stopped there, hovering, steady. The engine was screaming, but it was not braking. It was not failing. It was just delivering power, massive amounts of power that had always been there, waiting to be used. Howard exhaled. He had been holding his breath for 20 seconds without realizing it. His heart was hammering in his chest. He checked cylinder head temperatures. 237 degrees Celsius, well below the 260-degree limit Chilton had mentioned. Oil pressure still normal. Coolant temperature 105 degrees Celsius. Slightly higher than usual, but still within safe range. The engine was running hard, but it was not struggling. It was not being damaged. It was just working. Actually, working the way it was designed to work before. Regulations and fuel economy requirements and maintenance schedules had strangled it into mediocrity. He looked at his airspeed indicator. The needle was climbing. 390 miles per hour. 400 miles per hour. 410 miles per hour. It kept moving. 415 miles per hour. 417. Then it stabilized at 419 miles per hour indicated airspeed. At 25,000 feet, in level flight, with full internal fuel and full ammunition load, the Mustang was 39 miles per hour faster than it had been yesterday. 39 miles per hour faster than every technical specification said it should be capable of flying. Fast enough to catch a Bf-109. Fast enough to catch a FW-190. Fast enough to run down any fighter the Luftwaffe had, and actually protect the bombers instead of just watching them die. Something released in Howard's chest. A weight he had been carrying since the first time he flew a P-51 and discovered it was too slow. Since the first time he watched a German fighter escape while bombers burned. Since yesterday when he counted 12 B-17s go down and could do nothing to stop it. He keyed his radio. His voice was steady, but his hands were still shaking. Boxted Tower, Mustang 27. Engine test successful. Manifold pressure 7.4 inches. Airspeed 419 indicated. All cylinder head temps below 240. Oil pressure normal. Coolant temp normal. This aircraft is mission capable. There was a long pause. Then the tower controller came back. His voice sounded confused. Say again, manifold pressure? 7.4 inches mercury. 1.4 inches above printed red line. Engine is running clean, no abnormal vibration, no overheating, no issues whatsoever. Another pause. Longer this time. Mustang 27, return to base immediately. Major Christian wants to see you in his office. Howard smiled for the first time in 24 hours. Of course, Christian wanted to see him. Howard had just reported operating a United States Army Air Force fighter at specifications that violated every regulation in existence. That was either going to result in a medal or a court-martial. Possibly both. He turned the Mustang toward Boxted and started descending. Below him, England spread out in patches of green fields and gray clouds. Somewhere down there, Chilton was waiting to find out if his career was over or if he had just changed the air war. Howard landed at 7:51 a.m., 29 minutes after takeoff. 29 minutes that might have just saved hundreds of bomber crews. His legs were shaking when he climbed out of the cockpit. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from the knowledge that he had just flown an aircraft 14 inches over redline, and it had worked perfectly. Every regulation said it should not work. Every engineer at Wright Field would say it was impossible. Every technical manual said the engine would fail. But Howard had 29 minutes of flight time and 419 miles per hour of proof that all of them were wrong. Chilton was standing by the aircraft with Major Thomas Christian. Christian was the squadron operations officer. 34 years old. Veteran of North Africa. 47 combat missions. 2 aircraft shot out from under him. He had the look of a man who had watched too many friends not come back. When Howard walked up, Christian was holding the radio transcript from the tower. His expression was unreadable. "You reported 74 inches manifold pressure," Christian said. It was not a question. It was a statement that demanded explanation. "Yes, sir. Full throttle at 25,000 feet. Sustained for 12 minutes. Engine temps stayed below limits. No abnormal vibration, no warning lights. The aircraft performed flawlessly." Christian looked at Chilton. "What did you do to this engine?" Chilton stood at attention. His face was blank, but his hands were clenched at his sides. "Sir, I adjusted the carburetor fuel mixture from .067 to .084. Rich mixture. It allows higher manifold pressure without exceeding safe cylinder head temperatures. The modification took 9 minutes and violates Technical Order 3-7-1. Section 4, Paragraph 12, which prohibits unauthorized changes to engine fuel systems." Christian stared at him. "You violated a technical order." "Yes, sir." "Without written authorization from Wright Field." "Yes, sir." "Knowing you could be court-martialed." "Yes, sir." "But, sir, with respect, the technical order is wrong. The engine can handle this. I know it can. I have been building high-performance engines since I was 16 years old. The Packard Merlin is being strangled by regulations that were written for fuel economy and engine longevity, not combat effectiveness. We are losing bomber crews because our fighters are 10 miles per hour too slow. I could not watch that happen anymore and do nothing. Christian folded the radio transcript and put it in his pocket. Then he walked to the Mustang and ran his hand along the cowling. The metal was still warm from the flight. Chilton's modification was invisible from the outside. Just a few turns of a screw inside the carburetor. But those few turns had just made the P-51 Mustang the fastest fighter over Europe. Christian stood there for 15 seconds not saying anything. Howard and Chilton waited. The only sound was the wind across the airfield and the distant noise of other aircraft taxiing. Finally, Christian turned around. "How much faster is it?" he asked. Howard answered. 39 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, sir. Maybe 42 or 43 at 30,000. Fast enough to catch anything the Luftwaffe has. Fast enough to run down a Bf-109 or FW-1-90 that tries to escape. Fast enough to actually do the job we were sent here to do. "And you can sustain that speed?" Christian asked. "This is not just a short sprint that burns out the engine?" "No, sir. I flew at full power for 12 minutes. Temps stayed stable. Oil pressure stayed normal. I could have stayed at that speed for the entire fuel load if necessary. The engine is not being damaged. It is just being used correctly for the first time." Christian looked at Chilton again. "Can you do this modification to other aircraft?" Chilton nodded. "Yes, sir. Takes about 10 minutes per aircraft. Just adjust the carburetor mixture screw 4 turns clockwise from factory setting and lock it down with the jam nut. Any crew chief can do it if they know what to look for. I can train them in 5 minutes. How many aircraft can we modify today?" "All of them, sir. We have 42 P-51s in the squadron. I can have them all modified by 1,600 hours if you give me authorization and assign me enough crew chiefs to work in parallel." Christian pulled a notebook from his pocket. He wrote something. Then he tore out the page and handed it to Chilton. It read, "Crew Chief Chilton is authorized to perform carburetor fuel mixture adjustments on all assigned P-51B aircraft per verbal order from Major T. Christian, 354th Fighter Squadron Operations Officer, 15th of October 1943, 0755 hours. The note was signed and dated. That is your authorization," Christian said. His voice was hard. "If anyone asks, you are following my direct order. If this blows up, if even one engine fails because of your modification, I take the court-martial. Not you, not Howard, me. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Get started. I want every Mustang in this squadron modified by tonight. We have a bomber escort mission tomorrow morning to Brunswick. 300 B-17s. And I want every single one of our fighters fast enough to actually protect those bombers instead of watching them die." Chilton saluted and headed toward the maintenance shack at a run. Christian watched him go. Then he looked at Howard. His expression softened slightly. "You just flew an aircraft 14 inches over rated boost and reported no problems. That makes you either the bravest pilot I have ever met or the craziest. I am still not sure which." Howard met his eyes. "Sir, yesterday I watched 12 B-17s go down because I could not catch German fighters that were running away. 132 men. Today I flew an aircraft that can catch those fighters. If that makes me crazy, then every pilot in this squadron should be just as crazy." Christian almost smiled. Then his expression went serious again. "I am sending this radio transcript to 8th Air Force Headquarters with a recommendation that Chilton's modification be approved for fleet-wide implementation. If it works for us, it can work for every P-51 squadron in England. 300 aircraft, maybe 400 by next month. But Howard, understand something. If even one engine fails because of this modification, they will crucify all three of us. Chilton, me, you. We are betting our entire careers on the idea that a 26-year-old NASCAR mechanic from North Carolina knows more about Packard Merlin engines than every engineer at Wright Field combined. Howard thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "Sir, those engineers at Wright Field never watched a bomber crew burn alive because our fighters were 10 miles per hour too slow. Chilton has. I have. You have. That makes us more qualified than anyone at Wright Field to know what this engine actually needs to do." Christian nodded slowly. He pulled out his notebook again and wrote something else. Then he looked up. "Tomorrow we find out if Chilton is a genius or if we all get court-martialed. But Howard, here's what I know. Yesterday, 60 B-17s went down over Schweinfurt. 60 aircraft, 600 men. If your engine works the way you say it does, maybe tomorrow that number is 30, or 20, or 10. That is worth my career. That is worth all of our careers. Now, get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day." Howard walked toward the officers' quarters. Behind him, he could already hear Chilton working on the next aircraft. Cowling panels coming off. Tools clanging. The sound of crew chiefs being trained in how to adjust a carburetor screw 4 turns clockwise. The sound of a man who would not sleep until every P-51 Mustang in the squadron could fly fast enough to actually do its job. Howard thought about tomorrow. About flying escort for 300 bombers with an aircraft that could finally catch German fighters. About being able to fight instead of just watch. About Chilton risking everything on an idea that violated every regulation but matched reality. Tomorrow would tell the story. Either the modified Mustangs would perform as promised and bomber losses would drop, or engines would fail and careers would end and men would die. There was no middle ground, just success or disaster. And 600 miles away in Germany, Luftwaffe fighter pilots had no idea that the American fighters they had been outrunning for 3 months were about to get 39 miles per hour faster overnight. At 10:47 a.m. on October 16, 1943, Lieutenant Franz Becker pushed the throttle of his Messerschmitt Bf-109G forward and climbed through 22,000 feet over Brunswick, Germany. Below him, 291 American B-17 bombers were approaching the city in 3 massive box formations. Above him, scattered across 8,000 feet of vertical airspace, 140 Luftwaffe fighters were preparing to attack. Becker had flown 67 combat missions. He had 11 confirmed kills, 9 B-17s and 2 P-47 Thunderbolts. He knew exactly how this engagement would unfold because he had done it dozens of times before. The German fighters would dive through the bomber formations. The American escort fighters would try to intercept. The German fighters would accelerate away. The Americans would be too slow to follow. Then the Germans would circle back and attack again. It was not tactics. It was just physics. The Bf-109G was faster than the P-51 Mustang in level flight. That simple fact had kept Becker alive for 8 months of combat. He keyed his radio. Achtung. American escorts at 4 o'clock high. Range 5 kilometers. Mustangs. Becker had fought P-51s before. They were dangerous at close range. Good turning performance. 650 caliber machine guns that could shred a Bf-109 if they connected. But they had one fatal weakness. They were slow. At 25,000 feet, a Bf-109G could hit 387 miles per hour in level flight. A P-51B could only manage 380. That 7-mile-per-hour difference was everything. It meant German fighters could always escape, always reset, always come back for another attack. The Americans could chase, but they could never catch. Becker had survived 24 engagements by using that simple advantage. Today would be no different. "Staffel, follow me down. We'd take one pass through the bombers, then climb back to altitude. If the Mustangs chase, we accelerate and leave them behind. Standard procedure. Becker rolled, inverted, and pulled. His BF-109 dropped toward the bomber formation in a 60-degree dive. The airspeed indicator climbed rapidly. 350 miles per hour. 400. 450. The bombers grew larger in his gun sight. B-17s flying in tight formation. 50 yards between aircraft. Defensive crossfire from hundreds of .50 caliber machine guns. Attacking a B-17 formation was like flying into a wall of lead, but it was the only way to stop them. Becker picked his target, a B-17 on the edge of the formation, slightly lower than the others. He centered the bomber in his gun sight. 2 20mm cannons, 2 13mm machine guns. He waited until the range closed to 400 meters. Then he pressed the trigger. The cannons hammered. Tracers reached out toward the B-17. He saw strikes on the right wing. Then he was past the bomber and pulling up hard. 6 G-forces crushed him into the seat. His vision tunneled. The aircraft shuddered as it traded speed for altitude. He leveled off at 24,000 feet and looked back. The B-17 he had attacked was trailing smoke from the No. 3 engine, but still flying. Not a kill. Damage only. He would need another pass. That was when he saw the Mustangs. 6 of them. Diving toward his position from 26,000 feet. Fast. Becker checked his airspeed. 290 miles per hour. Too slow. He needed to accelerate before the Mustangs got into gun range. He pushed the throttle forward and put the nose down slightly. The Daimler-Benz engine roared. The aircraft accelerated. 310 miles per hour. 330. 350. He checked over his shoulder. The Mustangs were still coming, still closing. But that was fine. In 30 seconds, Becker would be at 380 miles per hour. The Mustangs would be at their maximum speed trying to catch him. Then Becker would level off and slowly pull away. The Americans would have to break off. They always did. Physics did not lie. The lead Mustang opened fire at 800 meters. Long range, desperation shot. Tracers arced past Becker's left wing. Not even close. Becker smiled. The Americans were frustrated. They had chased him and failed to catch him. Now they were wasting ammunition on shots that would never connect. He checked his airspeed again. 375 miles per hour. Almost at escape velocity, 5 more seconds. He leveled off and glanced back to watch the Mustangs fall behind like they always did. But they were not falling behind, they were still closing, still gaining. Impossible. Becker stared at the lead Mustang. It was 600 meters away now, still coming. The American pilot was holding formation, not dropping back, not losing ground. Becker checked his own airspeed, 382 miles per hour. Maximum speed for a BF-109G at this altitude. He was flying as fast as the aircraft could go, and the Mustang was still gaining. Slowly. Maybe 1 or 2 miles per hour faster. But gaining. Something cold settled in Becker's stomach. Actual fear. This should not be possible. He had fought P-51s 2 days ago. They had been slower. All of them. Every single one. What had changed? The lead Mustang closed to 400 meters. Becker could see the aircraft clearly now. Olive drab paint, white invasion stripes, serial number on the tail. And the nose was different somehow. Lower, more aggressive. Like the aircraft was leaning forward into the chase. The American pilot fired another burst. This time, the tracers passed 10 meters from Becker's right wing. Close enough that he could see them. Close enough to make his hand shake on the control stick. Becker broke left hard. Full aileron, full rudder. The BF-109 snapped into a tight turn. Maximum performance. The turn would bleed speed, but it would force the Mustang to overshoot or break off. Standard defensive maneuver. Becker had used it successfully dozens of times. The Mustang followed him through the turn, stayed on his tail, did not overshoot, did not break off, just followed, matched every move. Becker completed a 360-degree turn and rolled out heading north. He checked his airspeed, 320 miles per hour. He had bled off 60 miles per hour in the turn. He pushed the throttle forward again to accelerate. Behind him, the Mustang was also accelerating. Becker could hear his own breathing inside the oxygen mask. Fast, shallow, panicked. This was wrong. Everything about this engagement was wrong. P-51s did not fly like this. They could not fly like this. He had the performance data. He had fought them. They were slower. They had always been slower. Becker's wingman called over the radio. His voice was high, desperate. "I have a Mustang on my tail. I cannot shake him. He is faster than me. Franz, how is he faster than me?" Becker looked right. His wingman was 2 kilometers away, flying straight and level at maximum speed. A P-51 was 200 meters behind him, closing, the distance shrinking with every second. The American pilot fired. Tracers walked up the fuselage of the Bf-109. Strikes on the tail, on the canopy. Pieces of metal flew off. The 109 rolled left violently and started smoking. Then it nosed over into a dive. Becker did not see a parachute. His wingman was gone. Shot down by a fighter that should not have been able to catch him. A man Becker had flown with for 6 months. Dead in 10 seconds. Brake left now. Becker reacted without thinking. Pure instinct. He slammed the stick left and pulled back hard. The Bf-109 rolled and pulled. G-forces crushed him into the seat. His vision narrowed to a tunnel, then to a pinpoint. He was on the edge of blacking out. Behind him, he heard the sound of .50 caliber rounds hitting his aircraft. Metallic impacts, fast, rhythmic, like someone hitting the fuselage with a hammer. His left wing took hits. Holes appeared in the aluminum skin. He could see daylight through them. A fuel tank was punctured. He could smell gasoline, sharp, acrid. His engine temperature gauge climbed rapidly. Coolant leak. The Daimler-Benz was dying. Becker leveled off and looked for the Mustang. It was 300 meters behind him. Climbing, positioning for another shot. Becker had maybe 20 seconds before his engine seized completely. He could not fight. He could not run. The only option was to bail out. He reached for the canopy release. His hand was shaking. Before he could pull the handle, the Mustang fired again. The rounds hit his engine, cowling. The Daimler-Benz exploded in a spray of oil and metal fragments and fire. The aircraft pitched forward violently. Becker was thrown against his harness straps hard enough to bruise his chest. The canopy shattered. Wind screamed through the cockpit at 200 miles per hour. He pulled the harness release and pushed himself out of the aircraft. The wind hit him like being struck by a train. 200 miles per hour of raw force. It ripped his oxygen mask off, tore his goggles away, spun him sideways. He was tumbling through space with no sense of up or down, just spinning, falling, the sky and ground trading places every half second. He counted, forced himself to count. 1, 2, 3. Then pulled the ripcord with both hands. The parachute opened with a violent jerk that felt like it was tearing his shoulders out of their sockets. The harness straps cut into his thighs and chest. Suddenly, everything was quiet. Just the sound of wind rustling the parachute canopy and his own ragged breathing. Becker looked up. The Mustang was circling, watching him descend, making sure he did not try to get back to his aircraft. Not that he could. His Bf-109 was already gone, tumbling toward the ground, trailing fire and smoke. Then the Mustang rolled wings level and accelerated away to the north, chasing another Bf-109, and it was catching it. Becker could see it happen. The German pilot was running at full speed, and the Mustang was reeling him in like a fish on a line. Becker descended through 18,000 feet. Below him, he could see other parachutes, white canopies drifting down against the green fields of Germany. German pilots. 6 of them. No, 7. Men he had flown with, trained with, shared drinks with in the officers' mess just this morning. Jürgen, Klaus, Stefan. He knew their names, knew their families, all shot down in 4 minutes by fighters that should not have been able to catch them. Becker looked up at the sky where the air battle continued. More Bf-109s were running. More Mustangs were chasing them, and the Mustangs were winning. Every single time. The tactical advantage that had kept Luftwaffe pilots alive for months was gone. Erased overnight. Becker did not understand how. He did not understand why. He only understood that the rules had changed and German pilots were dying because no one had told them until it was too late. Captain James Howard pulled his P-51 Mustang into a climbing turn and checked his fuel. Half tank. Enough for another 20 minutes of combat before he needed to head home. He keyed his radio. Red flight status report. Red 2. 109 confirmed kill. No damage. Red 3. Damaged 190. He broke off and ran. I stayed with the bombers. Red 4. Splash 109. Sir, this thing is a rocket. I caught him at full throttle and he could not get away. He tried everything. I just stayed with him until I had the shot. Howard smiled. His entire flight was reporting the same thing. The modified Mustangs were faster than the German fighters. Fast enough to catch them. Fast enough to kill them. The engagement that should have cost 30 or 40 bombers had cost 6. 6 aircraft instead of 40. Because the P-51s could finally do their job. Howard looked down at the bomber formation. They were still in tight formation. Still heading toward Brunswick. Still protected. For the first time in 3 months, Howard was not watching bombers die while he flew helplessly behind German fighters he could not catch. For the first time, the P-51 Mustang was actually living up to its reputation as the best escort fighter in the war. 3 more Bf-109s dove toward the bombers from the east. Howard rolled inverted and pulled. Red flight, bandits diving from 3 o'clock. Going in. He dropped toward the German fighters. One of them saw him coming and broke off the attack. Turned east. Accelerated away at maximum speed. Tried to run. Howard pushed his throttle forward against the stop. The manifold pressure gauge climbed to 74 inches. 14 inches above the red line. The airspeed indicator showed 415 miles per hour. The Bf-109 was doing maybe 385. Howard was 30 miles per hour faster. The gap closed like a door slamming shut. 1,000 yards, 800 yards, 600 yards. The German pilot was flying straight and level at maximum possible speed, and Howard was reeling him in effortlessly. At 400 yards, Howard fired. 650 caliber machine guns. 70 rounds per second. 4,200 rounds per minute. The tracers reached out and touched the Bf-109. Strikes on the left wing. On the fuselage. On the engine cowling. The 109 started smoking. Black smoke, then white. Coolant leak. The pilot rolled left and bailed out. Howard pulled up and looked for another target. The sky was emptying. The German fighters that were still flying were running. Not tactically withdrawing to regroup. Just running. Heading east at maximum speed, trying to get away from Mustangs that were faster than anything they had ever encountered. Some of them made it. Most did not. Howard watched a FW-190 get caught by Lieutenant Morrison from Blue Flight. The German pilot tried every evasive maneuver in the book. Turns, dives, climbs, scissors. Nothing worked. Morrison stayed with him like they were welded together. Matched every move. Anticipated every break. Then shot him down at 23,000 feet over open countryside. The FW-190 fell out of the sky, trailing fire and smoke and pieces of structure. By 11:14 a.m., the engagement was over. The German fighters were gone. The bomber formation continued toward Brunswick unmolested. Howard checked his flight. All 4 aircraft still flying. No damage, no casualties. They had engaged 12 German fighters. Shot down 6, damaged 3 more. The remaining 3 had escaped, but they had escaped only because Howard had let them go to stay with the bombers. If he had chased them, he could have caught them. That was the difference. That was what 39 miles per hour of extra speed bought: the ability to choose the engagement, the ability to protect the bombers or chase the fighters, the ability to dictate terms, the ability to actually do the mission they had been sent here to do. Howard keyed his radio. Boxed control, red leader. Engagement complete. Escort continuing to target. 6 bandits confirmed destroyed. 3 damaged. No friendly losses. Chilton's modification is working exactly as promised. The 109s cannot run from us anymore. There was a pause. Then Major Christian came on the radio. His voice was calm, but Howard could hear the emotion underneath it. The relief. Copy that, Red Leader. Well done. Bring everyone home safe. Howard flew escort all the way to Brunswick. Watched the bombers drop their loads on the target. Watched them turn for home. Not a single bomber was lost after the initial engagement. By the time the formation crossed back into Allied airspace over Belgium, the final count was clear. 6 B-17s lost. 6 aircraft, 60 men. Some would have survived, some would be prisoners, but 60 men instead of 600, compared to 60 aircraft and 600 men 2 days ago. The modified P-51 Mustangs had reduced bomber losses by 90%, not through better tactics, not through heavier armament, not through more aircraft, just by being fast enough to catch German fighters and kill them before they could attack the bombers. Howard landed at Boxted at 1:37 p.m., 4 hours and 15 minutes after takeoff. He taxied to his revetment and shut down the engine. The Packard Merlin coughed twice and went silent. Chilton was waiting with a group of crew chiefs. All of them looked tense. They had spent the entire morning wondering if the modifications would work in combat or if engines would fail and pilots would die. When Howard climbed out of the cockpit, Chilton stepped forward. His face was pale. "How did it perform?" he asked. His voice was tight. Howard met his eyes, like a rocket. 74 inches manifold pressure for the entire engagement. Engine temps stayed below 2 weirdie. Oil pressure normal. Coolant temp slightly high but within limits. I caught 3 109s that were trying to escape. Shot down 2. Damaged 1. The Germans could not believe it. They kept trying to run, and we kept catching them. Your modification just changed the air war over Europe. Chilton closed his eyes for a moment. His shoulders sagged. Relief. Pure, exhausted relief. Then he looked up. Any engine problems in the squadron? Any failures? Any overheating? Any seized bearings? Howard shook his head. I talked to all 4 flights on the way home. 42 aircraft took off this morning. 42 aircraft came back. 0 mechanical failures, 0 engine problems, 0 aborts. Every single pilot reported the same thing. The Mustangs are faster than the German fighters now. We can catch them, we can kill them, and we can protect the bombers. That is what we came here to do, and now we can actually do it. That night, Major Christian sent a detailed after-action report to 8th Air Force Headquarters. The report included performance data from 42 P-51B Mustangs operating with modified fuel mixture settings. It included engagement results. 6 bombers lost compared to an average of 38 per mission over the previous month. 12 German fighters destroyed, 7 damaged, 0 friendly fighter losses, 0 engine failures, 0 mechanical problems of any kind. The report concluded with a single recommendation in capital letters: implement Chilton carburetor modification across all P-51 squadrons in European theater immediately. By November 1943, every P-51 Mustang in England was flying with rich fuel mixture and 74 inches manifold pressure. By December, the modification had been incorporated into factory production at North American Aviation in California. New P-51s rolled off the assembly line, already set to the higher performance standard. The technical manuals were rewritten. The red line on the manifold pressure gauge was moved from 61 inches to 75 inches. What had been an illegal modification that could result in court-martial became official United States Army Air Force procedure. And Luftwaffe pilots who had survived for months by being faster than American fighters suddenly found themselves being caught and shot down by aircraft they could no longer outrun. Staff Sergeant Robert Chilton received the Bronze Star in January 1944. The citation read, "For technical innovation and exceptional devotion to duty, resulting in significantly improved combat effectiveness of United States Army Air Force fighter aircraft, and contributing directly to the preservation of life among Allied bomber crews." Chilton never talked about what he did. When other crew chiefs asked him how he figured out the fuel mixture modification, he just said he knew engines. He knew what they could handle. And he knew that regulations written by people who never flew combat were not as important as keeping pilots alive. Captain James Howard flew 83 more combat missions in his modified P-51 Mustang. He shot down 6 German aircraft. He never lost a bomber under his escort. Not one. He survived the war and went home to his family in Ohio. 50 years later, in 1993, at a reunion of the 354th Fighter Squadron, someone asked him what the most important moment of the war was for him. Howard thought about it for a long time. Then he said it was the morning he flew an aircraft 14 inches over redline and discovered it worked perfectly. Because that was the morning American fighters finally became fast enough to protect the people who needed protecting. And that mattered more than any regulation ever written.